In 1993, everyone wanted Pablo Escobar dead. From the United States government to rival cartels, from Colombian authorities to a ragtag group of vigilantes and bloodthirsty civilians, all shared a single goal: the end of the world's most infamous drug lord. But there was one tiny problem. Despite being the most wanted man on the planet, no one knew where he was. The notorious kingpin, often called the King of Cocaine, had somehow managed to keep himself hidden. Yet, in the end, a single, desperate mistake would bring his long run to a brutal end. It was an error so surprising that it has left many to wonder. What was Pablo Escobar thinking during his last hours? In this video, we'll try to paint a picture of what we believe the last 24 hours of Pablo Escobar's life looked like based on police testimony, family testimony, and depictions in the media. So, let's dive into the final hours of one of the most infamous criminals in history. Happy birthday, King of Cocaine. On December 1st, 1993, Escobar turned 44. This was no grand celebration, though. The lavish parties that had defined his life in earlier years were a distant memory. The days are gone where the overflowing tables, throngs of guests, and extravagant displays of wealth and power. This birthday was different. He was alone, surrounded only by the empty reminders of a life he once led, with a small meal and a humble setting. To an outsider, it might have seemed insignificant, but to Escobar, this was the end of an era. For nearly 16 years, he had been the unrivaled king of cocaine, controlling the global cocaine trade, bending governments to his will, and ruling with a fearsome reputation that kept his enemies in check. For Escobar, power was an addiction as potent as any drug he'd ever sold. But power, once gained, must constantly be defended, and Escobar's grip on it was slipping. His former allies had turned into enemies, and the wealth that once bought loyalty and silence was now just a memory, as was the life of freedom he had once known. The birthday wasn't a celebration. It was a reminder of his fall from grace. A decade of bloodshed and power. Escobar's journey to power was marked by violence, manipulation, and a relentless ambition that recognized no boundaries. From 1983 to 1991, he engaged in a deadly game of hide-and-seek with the Colombian government, going to extreme lengths to avoid extradition to the United States. In Escobar's mind, extradition was a fate worse than death. He viewed himself as a Colombian hero, and to be tried in a foreign land was not only dishonorable, it was unthinkable. Determined to stay in his home country, he devised a strategy as ruthless as it was effective: plata o plomo, or silver or lead. This was Escobar's infamous offer to anyone who stood in his way: take a bribe and step aside, or face a bullet. The choice was simple, and most chose life. Over the years, Escobar ordered the deaths of thousands, from police officers and politicians to judges and civilians. No one was immune. If you crossed Escobar, you faced the ultimate price. But his violence didn't stop at individuals. He orchestrated the bombing of a civilian airplane in 1989, mistakenly believing a political rival was on board. The explosion killed over 100 innocent people and solidified Escobar's reputation as a man willing to go to any length to preserve his empire. His actions sent shockwaves through Colombia and around the world, forcing the Colombian government to consider a desperate alternative: strike a deal with the devil himself. La Cathedral, the prison, fit for a king. In 1991, a surprising turn of events led to Escobar surrendering, but on his own terms. The Colombian government, hoping to end the bloodshed, allowed Escobar to serve time in a prison of his own design, known as La Cathedral. But calling it a prison was almost a joke. La Cathedral was more of a luxurious retreat than a place of confinement, equipped with a spa, a casino, a nightclub, and even a private zoo. His sentence, became a continuation of his luxurious life, with visits from friends, politicians, and even celebrities like Argentine soccer legend Diego Maradona. Escobar's power was undiminished, and he continued to oversee his operations from within La Cathedral's walls. However, Escobar's arrogance and propensity for violence soon tested even the leniency of his situation. When two of his closest associates displeased him, he ordered their executions within La Cathedral itself, right under the noses of the Colombian guards assigned to watch him. This act of defiance was the final straw, sparking outrage both in Colombia and internationally. The government had no choice but to move forward with a plan to extradite him to the U.S., and Escobar knew his time in the fortress was over, on the run again. In July 1992, Escobar escaped La Cathedral, once again becoming a fugitive. Over the next 16 months, he shuttled between safe houses and haciendas across Colombia, relying on a dwindling network of loyalists. His family, who had once lived comfortably under his protection, were now scattered and fearful for their lives. With each passing day, Escobar's resources and allies waned. He was no longer the untouchable figure who ruled Colombia. He was a man on the run, haunted by the very forces he once controlled. A desperate father. Escobar's love for his family was one of his few redeeming qualities. Despite his brutal reputation, he was known to be a devoted father. As the days passed, his concern for his family's safety grew. The Colombian government, along with his enemies, had placed his family under intense surveillance, effectively turning them into hostages in a deadly game of cat and mouse. Their phone calls were monitored, and their movements were restricted. Escobar's enemies knew that his love for his family could be his greatest weakness, and they intended to exploit it. As his final hours approached, Escobar tried to contact his family, making a phone call that would ultimately lead to his undoing. But reaching them was no easy task. His family was reportedly held captive by the Colombian government, who used them as bait, hoping that Escobar's desperation to speak to them would reveal his location. Search Bloc and Los Pepes, a deadly alliance. Escobar's enemies were as relentless as they were numerous. On one side was Search Bloc, an elite task force created by the Colombian government with the assistance of the United States. Its sole mission was to capture or kill Escobar. Led by Colonel Hugo Martinez, Search Bloc was comprised of soldiers and officers who were not from Medellín, ensuring they had no personal connections or biases that could compromise their mission. But taking on Escobar was no easy task, as Medellín was practically Escobar's domain. His influence was so pervasive that in the first 15 days of Colonel Martinez's command, Escobar killed 30 of his men. But Search Bloc wasn't Escobar's only enemy. Los Pepes, a brutal vigilante group funded by Escobar's rivals in the Cali cartel, was equally determined to see him dead. Los Pepes, whose name stands for People Persecuted by Pablo Escobar, targeted not only Escobar, but anyone associated with him. Their methods were ruthless. Murders, bombings, and public executions became their calling card. Los Pepes were driven by a hatred for Escobar that bordered on obsession, and they were willing to go to any lengths to destroy him. Family in danger. Escobar's family attempted to flee Colombia, seeking asylum in Germany. But the German government rejected their plea, leaving them at the mercy of Colombian authorities. For Escobar, this was a devastating blow. He had always considered himself a protector of his family, but now they were as much prisoners as he was. In the days before his death, he sent a recorded message to a Medellín radio station where he angrily condemned Germany's decision. His voice, once full of bravado, now carried a note of despair. He was watching his world crumble around him. Escobar's son, Sebastian Marroquin, later recounted how his father was well aware that any phone calls could be monitored by the authorities. Despite this knowledge, Escobar made a call to his family on December 2, 1993. It was a decision he must have known would be dangerous, but he took the risk anyway. The fatal mistake. On December 2nd, 1993, Pablo Escobar made a decision that would end his reign as the most infamous drug lord in history. His empire had crumbled, his family was under government surveillance, and his life was at constant risk from both the Colombian government and rival cartels. But it was a simple phone call, a brief moment of connection, that would ultimately seal his fate. Escobar picked up the receiver to call his family, aware of the dangers, but likely underestimating just how close the authorities were to finding him. The search Bloc, a special Colombian task force trained with the sole purpose of tracking him down, had been waiting for this exact moment. Led by Colonel Hugo Martinez, the search Bloc had dedicated countless resources to intercepting and analyzing any communication from Escobar, hoping that one slip-up would reveal his location. And this phone call did just that. Colonel Martinez's son, also part of the search Bloc and deeply committed to the mission, was responsible for tracing the call. This created a unique and intense father-son dynamic on both sides of the hunt. Escobar, speaking to his own son in what would be one of their last conversations, was unaware that every word he spoke was leading his enemies to him. On the other side, Colonel Martinez and his son were not only tracking their target, but were acutely aware of the lives and families entangled in this mission. For Martinez's son, this was more than just a professional task. It was personal. He wanted to ensure that his father's years of dedication to the mission were not in vain. Within minutes of the call, search Bloc operatives moved swiftly, converging on the building where Escobar was hiding. Escobar was still on the line when he realized his worst fears had materialized. The air thickened with the weight of impending doom as he sensed the forces closing in on him. Desperation overtook him as he ended the call and made a run for the rooftops. His loyal bodyguard, known as El Limon, followed, but the authorities were prepared and ready to eliminate any resistance. El Limon was quickly taken down, leaving Escobar alone in his last moments. Cornered and realizing there was no way out, Escobar made a desperate bid for freedom, attempting to leap across the rooftops while exchanging gunfire with the approaching Colombian forces. It was a scene that seemed almost surreal. For a man who had spent years evading capture and outmaneuvering enemies, it was as if all his past actions had caught up with him in a final, inevitable reckoning. Shots were fired, and Escobar's last act of defiance played out in a chaotic storm of bullets as he tried to escape one last time. The end was near, and Escobar knew it. His powerful legacy of violence, wealth, and influence was reduced to this frantic sprint across rooftops with nowhere left to hide. It's a very dark reality. The end of Pablo Escobar. According to the official account, Escobar was shot and killed on that rooftop, bringing an era of terror and corruption to an end. His death sent shockwaves across Colombia and beyond, as news outlets around the world reported the fall of the king of cocaine. For the Colombian people, Escobar's death symbolized relief and the promise of peace after years of fear under his cartel's violent grip. The drug lord, who had once wielded immense power over the nation's institutions, politicians, and even the police, was finally gone. Just 24 hours earlier, Escobar had celebrated his 44th birthday. It had been a subdued celebration, a stark contrast to the lavish, extravagant parties that had defined his rise to power. Alone and isolated, Escobar could not have known it would be his last birthday. The fall from power had stripped him of nearly everything: his freedom, his family's safety, and most painfully, his sense of invincibility. The legend of Pablo Escobar had reached its bitter end, but the legacy of his empire and the pain he had caused would haunt not just Colombia, but the entire world for generations to come. So, was it really suicide? But even in death, Pablo Escobar's story is still shrouded in mystery. While the official account states that he was shot in a firefight with the Colombian forces, Escobar's family has maintained that he chose suicide over capture. His son, Sebastian Marroquin, claims that Escobar had previously taught him a specific method of suicide, explaining that if he were ever cornered without a way out, he would end his own life by shooting himself in the right ear. This detail is significant because when authorities found Escobar's body, he had a gunshot wound precisely in his right ear. To his family, this wound serves as proof of his suicide, a final act of control in a life marked by defiance. The theory that Escobar took his own life has fueled speculation and conspiracy theories for years. His family argues that the king of cocaine would never allow himself to be captured, much less killed by his enemies. To them, Escobar orchestrated his own end, preferring to die on his terms rather than at the hands of those who hunted him. Was this final act a last grasp at power, a way for Escobar to dictate his fate even in his final moments? Did Escobar die on his own terms? Whether he was killed by Colombian forces or orchestrated his own death, the dark mystery surrounding Escobar's final moments adds to the complex legacy he left behind. Escobar's story is one of contradictions. A man who claimed to love his country yet terrorized it. A family man who sacrificed everything for power and wealth. A kingpin who ultimately fell alone, far from the empire he had once ruled. His life and death continue to captivate the world, leaving a haunting question. Did Pablo Escobar choose his fate in one final act of defiance, or was he simply out of options? The truth may never be known, but one thing is certain. Pablo Escobar died as he lived, on his own terms, leaving behind a legacy of fear, wealth, and intrigue that will continue to be debated and examined. He remains a symbol of the dangers of unchecked power and ambition, and his life serves as a reminder of the devastating toll of Colombia's drug wars. So, what do you think? Was Escobar's death truly his own choice, or was it a calculated move by the Colombian forces? Well, let us know your thoughts in the comment section below. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing content like this.